patterns are a little too dancey. If it gets dancey, then it goes to a less important level. So the dancing parts of it are so deep in you, you don't need to worry about making the dancing. Just think about being these people. Yes, I do believe, yes, I will be good, I will, I will. And then you're on a whole different level. It's as though your body's responding and not your mind. So it's more about small inner shaping kinds of things that follow here. So it's really coming from deep inside. But the problems now are after the touch, walk back and touch. We need to work on that a little bit. When I started to choreograph the legacy, I was interested in coming in touch with my own kind of religious/cultural background, and I didn't know quite how to access it. And so first I was going to make an abstract piece. I had a group of dancers and selected, and some time selected for rehearsals. And I started using the music of Satie, Eric Satie, and I had selected pieces which were inspired by a rose window in a cathedral. And the piece was going nowhere. I had several rehearsals and nothing was taking place. And so I thought, well, Satie was in touch with his own kind of religious/cultural background and being inspired by this cathedral and this rose window. So what's my background? How can I let that feed me? So I thought back about my childhood as growing up in a Mormon family and culture, and decided that what really fascinated me about the Mormon culture wasn't so much the religion as the practice of polygamy. So my great-great-grandfather, Abel Evans, was born in Wales, joined the Mormon church there, came to the U.S., was sent by Brigham Young, the prophet of the church, the head cheese. He was sent to southern Utah to sort of pioneer a little development there. But he stopped in a place called Dry Creek, which is only like an hour away now from Salt Lake City. And he liked it there, and so instead of following his orders and going all the way to southern Utah, he stayed in this place called Dry Creek and became part of the Dry Creek settlement. And Dry Creek became known in a few years as Evansville, and not only my great-great-grandfather Abel Evans, but other Evanses were there in this community, and my grandfather married 3 women. One he met, she was Welsh, he met coming over on the journey. I believe they met, as I recall, they took a boat ride up the Mississippi and then came across the plains, and so her name was Mary Jones, and she was Welsh, and they married first, and then later on he married 2 other women. And so he had in one small little household, one little homestead, 3 women and many children, and I'd always been fascinated by this family history, knowing that my great-great-grandfather had 3 wives and all inhabiting the same house, but nobody ever talked about it. There was no folklore, no anecdotes had been passed down. It was just my generation, or my parents' generation, just stopped talking about polygamy because in a way they were embarrassed about it, and it's easier not to talk about it than to answer all the questions. So I thought, well, if I want to get in touch with my own religious/cultural background, I'll make a piece about my great-great-grandfather Abel Evans and his 3 wives. I'll do a piece about this polygamous family. I began this process of making a piece about polygamy, specifically about my own great-grandfather, but I knew very little about him. And so during this process, I was on tour with Rodey Theatre, and we were traveling through southern Utah, and we had a flat tire, and we used to tour with 2 station wagons and a truck. And one of our station wagons had a flat tire, so we broke down in this place called Fillmore, Utah, which had been the territorial capital of the territory of Deseret before Utah became a state. So while we were waiting for the tire to be repaired, we went into the old territorial capital building, and which is now a museum. We walked downstairs, and there on the walls were thousands of photographs of the early Utah Mormon pioneering families. And many of these families were polygamous families. So here were all these families with these dour expressions, very ramrod straight spines, and no laughter, no smiling, just all these serious looks, and the faces were just weather-beaten. You could tell these people had very hard lives, and they're very stern and serious. And I looked at one photograph where there was the patriarch, the old man, and the 3 wives, and then one of the children seemed to be about the age of the youngest wife, one of the male children, so that sparked an idea. Since I had already selected a cast that included me, Greg Lisenberry, and 3 women, Linda Smith, Kay Clark, and Lynn Wimmer. So I said, they're the characters, and that relates to my grandfather and his 3 wives, and so that was the situation. And first I tried to use some of the abstract material that I had developed to the Sati music for this group, but it just didn't make any sense at all. So I decided instead to, in essence, write a play, a 1-act play, and then to deliver it through movement rather than through text or words. So I've never found another subject that seemed to lend itself to that kind of portrayal, and mostly I'm interested in my work in delivering meaning on several levels at once. I think most of my pieces can be looked at on different levels, and you can bring to them your own information and your own way of looking, and so that you can come away from a piece with different layers of meaning. And the legacy is not, it is what it is. I thought that each of us should have the gestures, the little motifs that sort of described us, sort of captured the essence of who we were. And so I decided this, father and son both do this a lot. And I wanted to accentuate the angularity of father, because I actually ended up patterning my character, the father figure, on Herman C. Goetz, who was a stake president in the Lehigh Stake. He was like the spiritual leader of our whole community. He was a tall, gaunt man. And when I thought of him, I thought of angularity and directness and strength and determination and clarity, and which are not the qualities with which I usually move at all. I usually like flow and fluidity and roundedness and volume, but so I became Herman C. Goetz, and then I make these sharp, quick, little staccato gestures, because he was sure about everything, and he knew where he was going, and he knew right from wrong, and so I developed those motifs for me in a lot of prayerful, direct communication to God. And then, so for Greg, the son, we just kind of softened the same things, because he was not nearly so dogmatic a figure. He operated more from his feelings and less from this sense of being always right. So he would do the same gestures, but with more softness and larger range of movement, more flexion and extension of his spine. And then for the first wife, the mother, I took this as a motif which she used over and over again, and to me that meant that her emotion would start to flow a little bit, and she'd pull it back and know that as a proper Mormon Victorian era woman, she had to keep her emotions in check and controlled, but it would start to get away from her, and then she'd pull it back in. The second wife, I saw as someone who really didn't want to live within this kind of regimented, angular, straight-back world, and so I put in these little hip gestures and this little twisting action. So she would sit into one hip a lot. That became one of her things. And then the younger wife, the third wife, I assumed had not had the same hardship in her life. She had not had to carry or to push a handcart across the plains. My own great-great-grandmother pushed a little handcart, like a wheelbarrow, from Iowa City, Iowa, all the way to Salt Lake City, Utah, and walked behind it. I mean, they really had the most difficult life. And they faced near starvation, devastating illness, all kinds of horrible things. But in my mind, the third wife, the younger wife, came after the Union Pacific Railroad had been established. She came on the train, and so she had not had the same kind of hardship. So she had softer, more kind of delicacy, and so her gestures were more the refined gestures of a Victorian woman at the time, and there was a lightness and an indirectness in her attitude. So each of these people, for each of these people, I developed these motifs, and then we keep coming back to them throughout the piece, so that each one had his or her own language.
But it's Wednesday, and it's my day.
I always hate Wednesdays.
Oh, please, dear Lord.
You think of these angularities.
Okay.
I decided to try to capture the rhythm of speech, the dynamics and the phrasing of speech patterns in the choreography. So there will be a flurry of activity, and then a sustained moment, and then a silence, stillness. So I tried to capture speech patterns in the way I phrased the rhythm of the movement. And so I found that worked for me best if I would put words. They're not necessarily the same words every time I perform the piece, and as we've had various casts over the years, different characters have had different words, they said. But I tried to base the rhythmic phrasing upon the phrasing of words. So when I teach to someone, I'm constantly telling them what it means, so using dialogue. And some dancers enjoy that process more. Your reason for going forward is that she leads you back. She leads you. So don't anticipate. So you go to touch it and you think, oh, I better not do that. So you catch yourself. Your hormones have kicked in and they're controlling you. And and then you think, oh, what am I doing? And then you back away from it. Yeah, that touch over on your shoulder seems so oblique. If your touch would go right to his mouth and his throat and his, so you're just following some instinctive desire here. And then, oh, what am I doing? I can't do this. And he says, and then your hormones kick in and you rush after her because you're out of control now. So I have fun. I love making up this dialogue. and some dancers who come from more abstract backgrounds have not been quite so comfortable with that. So I choreographed this piece, at least 3/4 of it in silence. And several things, several factors were at work here. The Repertory Dance Theater studio was very long and very shallow. So everything I choreographed at that time went across the stage a lot, back and forth, and hardly ever went downstage and didn't use very much diagonal pathway downstage, because for me to get any look at it at all, sitting against the wall, I had to make patterns that went back and forth. So a lot of the legacy is about going from stage right to stage left. And then I developed the characters. I really wanted this piece to revolve around Greg, the son. In my mind, he was the central figure. He never leaves the stage. He's on stage from beginning to end. Everybody else comes and goes. And so I started by making the duets with his mother, Linda, and Greg, and then the third wife. So those, to me, those two duets were like the core of what this piece is about, the relationship we had with the two of them. So both of those were choreographed entirely in silence. And then I tried to figure out what Lynn's role was in this. And Lynn Wimmer, the middle wife, the second wife, had tremendous elevation. She loved to leap and jump. So I've choreographed a role for her which is all about these big leaps and these leg gestures. And that seemed part of her fiery temperament and part of her temper tantrums that she was always throwing. So I started developing her material sort of out of context. I had these two duets, and as I usually do, I choreograph my own role last. When I'm in my own piece, I usually shape everything else, and then I fit myself in. And because I have to know what I'm relating to. So my intent originally was to commission a score from Stanley Sussman, who was a composer, friend of mine. He'd been an accompanist often in my technique classes, and I loved his music, and we had established a rapport with each other. So I wanted to commission a new score. So I was going to choreograph this piece in silence, and then send a videotape and kind of a narrative, written narrative to Stanley and have him write music for it. But it turns out that we needed a premiere for a repertory dance theater January season. Our plans hadn't worked out. RDT had gotten a grant. So several factors came together, and we decided it should be ready for January. So that meant I couldn't let this collaboration with Stanley continue. I had to find some music. So I didn't know where to begin, and I had purchased a recording of an Elliott Carter string quintet, and because I was thinking I might choreograph to that someday. And I had never played what was on the flip side of that record. So I went home and I started pulling up my recordings, and I turned it over and I said, string quartet #1, Harold Shapiro. Never heard of the guy. Why not? So I put it on and I played a little bit, and I thought, it has a kind of a Copland-esque quality to it. It has this real Americana-ish, it seems to be telling a story. I thought, boy, this might work. So I made a little tape of it, took it into the studio the next day, and I just put it on. And I said to Greg and Linda, the son and the first wife, I said, why don't you do some of your duet? Well, it turns out that the section of music that I was playing had this little bum bum, bum bum, bum bum bum, and this little two-note sequence with an interval in between. And I had choreographed for Greg and Linda this material. She goes, he goes, these little two-step, and played the music, and they started, and they were stepping on the beat of the music. I thought, this is too unbelievable. It looked absolutely as if this music had been written for this movement, or the movement had been choreographed to it. It was so perfect. And that duet needed hardly any fixing. It just sort of fell into place. So I said, this has never happened before. So I said, well, I'm going to work with it. But then, so we got Harold Shapiro's permission to use it, and I listened to the 4 movements. I said they've got to come in a different order, because I think it was the I can't remember now which movement. I had to move one of the movements around so that it made dramatic sense, and he said that was okay to do that. And then I had a real difficult time choreographing the first movement and the fourth movement. Now the first and fourth movement, because the ideas and the information I had to convey in those movements took a lot more time than the music allowed me. So I had to keep going back and cutting and editing down and throwing stuff out, and the whole piece has to resolve itself because of the musical structure in like a minute. And I would love to have had 3 or 4 or 5 minutes to resolve the whole, but the musical structure just didn't allow that. So in a way, I think part of the success of the piece comes from the fact that I had to keep editing it down because, as Doris Humphrey says, all dances are too long. And by cutting out everything extraneous, I really got it down to a point where every moment is meaningful. There's no dead wood in the choreography because the movement didn't allow me that. And so anyway, that's how it came about. The original cast was in some ways the best cast, because, as I always do, I involve, I create a piece for a specific dancer, a specific performer. I love the fact that everybody's different, physically different, has different strengths and weaknesses and different personalities. And I love that. That's my favorite thing about being a choreographer, is that opportunity to collaborate with a dancer and bring out things I perceive in that dancer, and let that dancer explore things, maybe sometimes things that nobody else would ask them to do, but the combination of who they are and what I see them as being creates an opportunity for this kind of discovery and exploration. So there's a lot of Linda Smith in the mother figure, and a lot of Lynn Wimmer in the second wife, a lot of Kay Clark, a lot of Greg, all those original characters. I used who they were, and I knew these people intimately because we danced together 52 weeks a year for years already by the time I did the Legacy. So I knew them inside and out. So I told them that I was basing these characters on my research. And I did read whatever novels I could find, or any history I could find about polygamy. And I told them I was basing these characters on research, but mostly I was basing these characters on just who they are. And if I said, let's say that Linda is in this situation, how would she act? And if Lynn were in that situation. So in a way, the original cast was always the best cast, and every other cast has had to sort of reshape themselves into that mold. And the original cast were all in Utah. So they knew the Mormon culture, and if I made an allusion to something about being a Mormon or being in Utah, they knew what it meant. And subsequent casts have mostly come from elsewhere. Some of them have never visited Utah, so it's not so palpable to them. It's not so immediate and so real. There's a section in the piece where I'm dancing with one wife, and we make like a half revolution, and then I extend my arm to another wife and make another revolution, and then there's no third arm for the third wife. Okay. So this kind of pinwheel around father with the other figures wheeling around, we called the marriage go-round. And it seemed a perfect way. I started with the second wife, with whom I have this love-hate relationship, and then we make a half revolution, and the young wife joins me. So we make another half revolution, and so of course the first wife was at the top of the pecking order, so second wife had to leave. So it was a perfect device for showing the fact that this the middle wife, there was no place for her, and so Lynn Wimmer, who was the original second wife, and I were both middle children. So we both understood this middle child complex, and so we just said that she has a middle wife complex because she never had her fair share of time between wives. And so being the middle child, we both have siblings just younger than us. We know what it's like to have your place taken by someone, so we use that idea a lot. So when Deborah Landau first did the role of the mother, she just had no inkling of how to make this character come alive, because Debra is a very kind of loose, gangly, athletic person, and she came into dance late, and she really was an athlete and kind of an intellect before she was ever a dancer. And one of the reasons I love working with her is that she is so intelligent and has such a wide range and doesn't have a lot of mannerisms that one develops in dance class, because she came to dance as an adult. And also, Deborah Landau loves flow. She's a very liquid, fluid, kind of weighted mover. And so the whole idea of spending life in a corset, in a high dress and laced-up boots, and of being a mother, being an authority figure, all those things were totally outside her life experience. So when she first did the role, it wasn't very well developed. I mean, she did everything I asked her to do, and she's a lovely dancer, but it wasn't making dramatic sense. It wasn't touching people, moving people. So we put it aside, and 6 months later we came back to it, and I just kept trying different approaches. And finally she had to become Don's mother, and Don had to become her son. I mean, finally and she had to become my wife. I mean, all these roles that she just has spent her whole life avoiding. She didn't want to be a wife and a mother, and as our culture says they have to be. You know, she's a very free, aggressive, assertive woman, and so for her to be able to put herself in all these roles to do this piece it was a big challenge for her. But I think finally she came to the place where I really did feel that she was my wife, this strong, supportive figure, and she really was Don's mother. And to me, it's her. At first I thought it was going to be about Greg, it was going to be the son's piece, but then as it evolved, it became her piece. The first wife, she's the core of this piece, as far as I'm concerned. Father as kind of a pompous fool, as I see him, and frankly, I looked at a lot of the male patriarchs in my culture and see them as pompous fools. And so it took me a long time to get deeply into this character, because I saw him as such an idiot. They go around thinking they've got all the power, but in fact it's the women who do all the work and hold things together, and so that's what I was saying, that it was the Debra figure, the wife and mother figure, who really was keeping the harmony in the family and really manipulating Papa, who is such a vain, pompous ass, and so she knows exactly when to engineer things so that he thinks he's in control, and she keeps flattering his ego enough, but it's really up to her to keep harmony in the household. And also the earliest wife, was in a kind of a threatened position, because as she became older and as Dad got enough money that he could afford to have younger wives, her position, she was in danger of losing her power and her importance in the household. So she had to constantly flatter her husband, and I mean, she has a very difficult role to play. So in a way, it's her ballet. I think she's the person who has that role is the most difficult one to portray. The other figures are pretty much the same throughout, but she has to be a little bit of everything and engineer the whole situation. To me, the piece is saying, the end is saying that mother, the first wife, has engineered things so that father thinks everything's okay. And father wants to think everything is okay. He wants to think that he's the Lord and master and everything is the way he wants it to be, and yes, everything's just fine. But in fact, nothing is just fine, and because everything is suppressed, because nothing's really allowed to be what it is, it's always going to be, just beneath the surface, there's going to be all this unhappiness and this turmoil, and but father is really just concerned with the surface. As long as he believes everything's okay, then he'll be happy. And mother's job is to keep father imagining that everything's okay. And if you look at it on a deeper, more honest level, father's a tragic character, I think, because he's self-deluded. And the second wife is a tragic character because she's caught in this loveless relationship. And mother, really, she probably has a lot of satisfaction knowing that it's all up to her to keep this household together. And she's the person who's able to, she has the power and love. I think father really loves her in a way that he can't love anybody else. She's been there for him, she's supported him and kept him together. So he, even though his fancy is taken by the young, beautiful wife, he has a love for his first wife that no one else can ever replace. So, but to me, this household has got a lot of turmoil ahead of us because father doesn't want to face reality, and the second wife is so mistreated, so abused, and her situation's pretty hopeless. And the third wife, as I see it, is probably going to leave because as I portrayed her, she just puts up with father just enough not to offend him. But she, as long as he doesn't realize that he's being condescending to, he's happy. But there's really nothing for her in this relationship. Nothing that's really right for her. So the ending of the piece, to me, is the beginning of the piece. So as I saw it, when I was strolling through this museum in southern Utah, I'm looking at all these family portraits, and I saw this one family, and it's pretty much in the poses we are in the beginning of this piece. I thought, I wonder what it was like when they were all coming together for this portrait sitting. So the end of the piece to me is the moment just before the photographer takes the photograph. And so everything has been leading up to that moment. So when Debra turns, or the second wife turns, shows her hurt and her what am I trying to think of here? She's showing, the middle wife lashes out and she says spiteful, nasty things because she's so deeply hurt and she's so vulnerable. So just as she spits out that last nasty little comment, then the photographer takes the shot.